when the proposal of charter reform was when I first saw the headline, I thought, wow, this is incredibly exciting. Somebody's actually thinking about what the city needs and what we need to do to bring it into the future and to take it into the middle of the 20th century. We can think about what we want to become in the next 50 years, what we want the next generation to be able to have looking forward, in terms of opportunity, etc. We look at this town. It's got an incredible shoreline. It has amazing architecture. It has some phenomenal neighborhoods. You know them. You live in them. And it would be great to see the city enhanced economically, in terms of its recreational opportunities, in terms of its educational system. I think we've had some good management financially. I'm sure that could be improved as well. But when I started to read what the articles were all about, I was frankly disappointed that what they were talking about was extending the mayor's term and paying the council more money. I think it's unfortunate that the focus appeared to be on what would be good for the politicians and good for the elected officials, and not necessarily what was good or necessary or important for the citizens of Norwalk, for the voters, for the taxpayers, for the people who are resident in the city. And that's ultimately why I was disappointed, because in my mind, I don't see how, now I can certainly see how allowing someone 4 years to figure out how to learn a job rather than 2 years would be important. I certainly am not keen on the notion of someone being paid $50, for the work that they do on the council. Clearly, I think it's fair to say that would be insulting. On the other hand, I'm not certain, considering the amount of time and frustration that they face, that 500 is necessarily going to be a whole lot better. It certainly isn't going to solve the problems of the city, and extending the mayor's term isn't really going to solve the problems of the city or move us forward. I'd like to see us actually figure out what it is that we need, and then figure out, if we're here and what we need is over here, how do we get from point A to point B? How do we solve some of the problems of the city? I view the city government as being dysfunctional. I read how people can't figure out who's responsible for performance evaluations for city employees. Nobody can figure that out. Nobody knows. Well, it's written right here that the X person is. Intelligent people who care about the city, whether you agree with them or not, can't figure out who's responsible for simple things like personnel and performance evaluations, or whether or not you should have them, or whatever. That's the level of dysfunction that we see as citizens, that we are viewing as citizens on an ongoing basis. Now, I don't think that a city manager form of government, it's interesting, we need to take note of what was said about the fact that if the council opposes it, and the mayor opposes it, and everybody's opposed to it, it's not going to happen. We've seen that. That's sort of what we face on a day-to-day basis for the most part. And it's sad to watch. There are many folks who are very passionate and committed to the city, but I think the form of government gets in the way of actually getting anything done. And I would like to see a city government that allows for expertise to be predominant. You're really witnessing somebody who's talking about someone who knows how to run a city, running a city, or at least being available to those who are the policymakers and the legislators, the administrators and the legislators. That sounds to me like, I'm thinking, wow, this is an idea that's got a lick of sense. I think we ought to listen to it. We ought to take you know, we ought to take cognizance of that. It sounds right to me. It feels right emotionally to think about that. And then ultimately, we should think, is our city government working right now? If it's not, then how would we get it to work? I think certainly expertise, accountability. Right now, no one seems accountable for anything that happens or anything that goes wrong. Certainly none of the individual council members. The mayor seems to be sort of at the mercy of the council. If you read and in preparing for this evening, I thought, well, you know, I really ought to read the charter, at least ought to read some of the key provisions of it. If you read the charter of, say, the city of Stamford, it actually is pretty clear and straightforward, pretty organized. You sort of get the notion of what it's all about. If you read the description of the duties of the mayor and the duties of the council in Norwalk, I mean, it's like, I don't know who wrote it, and I don't know who voted for it or who enacted it. But I will say that it seems to be indicative of the fact that Norwalk missed the good government movement of the late 19th century in a big way. And I would like to see us maybe move to the point where we actually caught up to the good government movement of the late 19th century, and then maybe even perhaps moved beyond that into the 20th and the 21st century, and were able then to be in a position to move forward. And that, to me, is what is exciting about the possibility of charter reform.
And this is a discussion that should have been years ago, and I'd like to take a different task. I'd like to ask the following questions. What's happened over the last 30 years, and what should we be concerned about? And then should we change our charter to reflect those concerns, to make sure that those who inherit this city will have the same opportunities that we have? And to get to the quick, I think there's just one change that we need, and that's to have an elected finance board. Presumably, with an elected finance board to set the budget, people with financial backgrounds, financial interests, people that are comfortable reading budgets. Those people would most likely give us a better outcome than what we have currently. The finance boards are widely used. I'm told that the surrounding 5 towns use them. The town of Greenwich use them. As to all the other changes, I think once you get involved in trying to fine-tune how organizations work, you run astray. It's the people, never the organization, that makes it worthwhile. In the last couple of years, we've had an extraordinary demonstration of how individual people can dramatically change city outcomes. For several decades, we've had to be polite, problematic Board of Education, yet a very gifted and dedicated individual takes the opportunity to demonstrate that that board can be revitalized and become an object of our admiration and respect. No rules were changed. The charter wasn't changed. That ought to remind us that it's the people, never the organization. But why be concerned about making a charter change? If we look back over 30 years ago when I came here, we had a very vigorous political system with 2 vigorous political parties, an independent party. Public meetings were widely attended. I attended many of those. We had several hundred people who were actively involved in civic affairs. Elections were exciting. People had platforms. You couldn't get serious consideration for running for office unless you worked through the apprentice system, unless you could send an op-ed to the Hour and demonstrate your platform were exciting times. And Norwalk was well regarded as a well-governed city. And curiously, at those times, city employees were paid modest salaries, particularly relative to the incomes of the city. I recall that when I first came here, the only city employee that made as much as $50,000 was the superintendent. Now let's fast forward. Times have changed. The parties are not vigorous. Strange things happen in the council. Strange things happen in the Board of Education. Public participation is not very strong. And if we look at the city's finances, we make some interesting observations. Since the year 2003, residential property values haven't changed. That's quite remarkable for 12 years. There are actually very few cities in the United States in which you can say that property values have not changed. We're a city that whose per capita income ranks 20th in the state. And according to the recent arbitration report, we rank 5th in teacher salaries. Most city employees now are earning pretty close, if not above, 6 figures, particularly when benefits are taking place. Yet the median household income in Norwalk is only about $70,000. Many people are unaware that roughly 10% of our city lives below the poverty level. And at the other extreme, there are approximately 1,200 families that have significant 6-figure incomes, and the rest of us are all in the middle. So my concern going forward is to ask, well, what can we do to get better control of our finances?
In my mind, a lot of the issues that we have in Norwalk speak to the lack of public participation and the fact that we don't engage the public, and certainly not at the right time. I would have expected that there would be something that would solicit feedback from the community of what you might want to see in charter reform. I don't think charter reform or revision happens every year. It's the type of thing it shouldn't, and it's when you do it, you really want to make it a comprehensive exercise. And then the next step was kind of the next headlines were what some of you folks were talking about then, is where all of a sudden it said, there was a headline of, we don't really think we have the votes to even put together the commission. And I think someone was quoted, or maybe it was just understood that way, where it said there didn't seem to be a lot of public interest. Well, there's not a lot of public interest in anything if you're not asking the public what their interest is. And so from a process point of view, I wonder if you can talk to that, because I actually have a list here of items that I think should be considered for revision, like residency clauses for department heads, and if we have extended terms, I'd like to see term limits. And I'm a taxpayer, I'm a citizen, I would like somebody to ask me. So from the process point of view, would you comment on that?
I just say that I don't really know why the decision was made or why there was a consensus reached that there were no votes or that this was to be killed. I just assumed when I sort of read through what was necessary in terms of the process, that those folks who decided, well, we want the mayor to have a 4-year term and we want X to happen, and that's all we want, when they realized that in fact once the council, 2/3 of the council voted to open it up, and then they had to appoint a commission, and then the commission was only going to be 1/3 elected politicians, and that then there was, that they could write whatever they wanted to write, that the control that people wanted to have over the process. In other words, the council wasn't going to be able to say, we want a charter that's going to be X, we want this change or that change, so we'll vote for it. It was, no, we want charter reform, and knock yourselves out, folks. Knock yourselves out, do it up the way you think you ought to do it, and then I guess we'll hear from you when you're done with your process. And that wasn't particularly palatable to the folks who are going to have to vote to open up the process. So I assume that's why it was killed, and I assume that's why it would be difficult to get it going. I could be completely wrong. There may have been some other reason someone may have had some other, some other issue that they wanted to get on the ballot or whatever. But I just figured that there was a sense that, wow, I may not be able to kill it at the end of the day, and it may be something I don't want, so therefore, let's not even go down that road.
This is really a manifestation of how business gets done in Norwalk. Nobody wants to do the work. So why should anybody be surprised that charter reform didn't get much traction in our common council? That's the thing that we ought to ask. Why are the council members so bloody lazy that they can't do what people did years before? Take up a pen, write your thoughts, get a public discussion going. The question we ought to ask is, how did the city work so well 25 and 30 years ago with the same governance that we have now? Doesn't seem to work well now. Is it really the governance or the people? I would suggest to you that the people are quite different.
So I'm not sure if there's something in the charter about a way to start a charter commission or a charter reform thing, like a constitutional convention in concept, but that could easily be enough be researched. It's not, typically it's not the only way for the people in power to agree to change the power structure, because often enough they don't want to do that. I think it should be fair to note that some of the people on the council were there 15 years ago or so, and the current chairman of the Board of Education was a councilman in the past. My counterpart was as well. So some of the same people are still around as far as that goes. I don't know if, how much things have changed. I haven't been here forever, as some of you have.
In response to what Mr. Berman said, I think your idea of having those who are actually going to manage and can control to some degree the finances of the city elected, I think that's a phenomenal idea. It would allow for accountability. It would allow for more direct control by the electorate and by the taxpayers. And as somebody who admires your fiscal conservative stances that I've read in many of your comments, I think that's a great idea. I think I have a different view of sort of your notion that it's always the people and it's never the structure. There are a lot of cities around the state. We could all think of one or two. And I think the people are probably a lot like the folks in Norwalk. I don't think that the people from one town to another are that different. But the structures that they're operating under for their governments are very different. And I've been in organizations, including the one that I work in now, where the structures of departments matter. The makeup of the people matters. The quality of the people matters enormously. And it may be that we simply don't have, not having been around the city, not having had the privilege of living in the city for that long, I don't know whether the quality of the public servants was, significantly better 25 years ago or not. But my sense is that I think that we've got a lot of really great people who are stepping forward to work in a government and a system that has got to be enormously frustrating to try to accomplish anything in. And I think that if we change the structure, we'd have the same people in any event. And maybe if the people are different from what they were 25 years ago, maybe we need to adjust the structure in order to assist them in dealing with it. If the group that's coming, to run the city is different from what it was 25 years ago, maybe we need to adjust the structure in order to be able to actually get the structure and the government working for the people. And, I certainly would, lament certain things that have happened in the last several years, and I'm sure we all can see from some of our elected officials that have been, frankly, an embarrassment. I'm not certain that having, say, a city manager would
Present
necessarily...
company accepted, of course.
Of course. I'm not certain that having a city manager would prevent those people from embarrassing themselves, but it might prevent them from actually, whirling into dysfunction the entire structure of the government. And that actually could be very helpful to everybody who lives in town, anybody who wants to move here, and even, the folks who may be thinking of leaving, for that matter. But I do think that the structure matters, and I think that while we should be very careful about making any changes, I think the time's come where we can see it's not working. Let's see if we can make it work.
The real question that I would ask for you is, how did it happen that our last development was in the early 1980s with Merit 7, and then nothing happened in Norwalk in terms of enhancing a large corporate development office, facility? Office development took place all around the county. Every other major city and community engaged in corporate development office since the 1980s, but not Norwalk. Is there something strange about Norwalk? I think there is. I think it's a fair assessment to say that the individuals hired in the redevelopment office did not bring the professionally required capabilities. That's a great tragedy. And that's why the hole in the ground has sat there for a long time. My concern with how that hole gets filled is that Norwalk is in a very vulnerable position because only about 10% of its grand list comes from what we call commercial development. And once we proceed in the way that it seems that things are going to happen, we can say that for our generation, there would be no more corporate development in the city of Norwalk. What that basically means is that the taxpayers pick up 90% of the city budget. There's no chance to do what Stanford has done. And if you sit down and go through the budget and go through the sums, you begin to worry, what is the future? Is the future more like Bridgeport, or is it going to be something else? I'd like to leave you with a thought. Every mayor of the last 30 years has come into office, kept the same administrative staff. Those of you who think that you can only change the city by charter trained, want to ask the question, why do the mayors always keep the same staff? Maybe that's how you get something done, by asking the question, why do they keep the same staff?